Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Tracy Chapman has always hated the spotlight. She rarely gives interviews, and when she does, they tend to describe her as quiet, shy, and humble. And yet, as an artist, her work is deep, powerful, and loud in its own quiet way, speaking volumes from within that humble voice. She seems to prefer to let her music, not her life, be the focus, so I'm gonna do the same. This is a video about Fast Car. Let's take it apart. The song starts like this, with Chapman playing the guitar line that underpins most of the song. It's somewhere between a chord progression and a riff, but like with a lot of guitar stuff, it's probably best understood as a series of physical shapes on a fretboard. In this case, each chord contains 3 notes, so we can treat it as 3 single-note melodies moving together through the progression and analyze each one individually. Let's start with the top line played on the B string. This is the most iconic melody in the song, probably more so than the actual vocal melody. It's such a simple part, but so memorable that to many listeners, it's all you need in order to know that the song you're about to hear must be Fast Car. For now though, let's do a little melodic reduction. We'll get rid of the trills, skip the repeated notes, and unsyncopate the rhythm. Those things are important, and we'll bring some of them back in later, but without them, we get a much clearer picture of the melody's overall shape. And for this, I'm going to give you 2 different analyses. The first one is wrong, or at least very hard to justify in context, but bear with me because I think it'll be useful anyway. Let's assume we're in the key of C# minor. If so, this is a very strong melodic contour. We're walking up a C# minor triad from the root to the 5th. For a bit of decoration, she sets up the G# by resolving to it from a half step up. In this key, it's all really stable, starting and ending on consonant notes, with the more colorful sounds tucked neatly in the middle, and if we were actually in this key, the rest of it might sound something like this. But it doesn't, because we're not. We're in A major, and that changes things. We're still walking up the 1 chord, but now we're starting on the 3rd and ending on the high root. Once she's there, she falls off that root, sliding down a half step to the 7th. This inverts the polarity of the melody. It looked like the root and 5th of the key were the endpoints, but they're actually crammed in the middle, framed by spicier notes like the 3rd and 7th that challenge the overall sense of stability. And to explain that choice, we have to turn to the narrative. Fast Car is very much in the singer-songwriter folk rock tradition, and as such, it's extremely story-forward. We'll get into the details of that story a little later on, but in a single sentence, it's a song about trying and ultimately failing to escape the cycle of poverty, and we can see different aspects of that in our 2 different analyses of this line. Like, yes, C# minor is definitely the wrong key, but that kinda doesn't matter. Framing the melody around the 3rd and 7th still superimposes a minor aesthetic on top of the apparently major progression, creating this poignant, bittersweet sound that contains both the longing for a better life and the recognition that it's not coming. On the other hand, if we do view it in A major, we see a triumphant march upward, arriving at a high root as a moment of pure, blissful escape, and then a fall. The whole thing comes crashing down to earth, punctuated by a tragic slide to the most dissonant note in the scale. It's tempting to say that one of these is the correct way to read this line, but I don't think that's how analysis works. There's no right answer, there's just useful perspectives. Taken together, they all provide a more complete picture of the emotional landscape than any one interpretation ever could. The next line I want to look at is the lowest one, played mostly on the A string and doubled by the bass. As you might expect, these are the chord roots, and they tell us what the harmony is, so now seems like a good time to talk about that. It's basically a 4-chord loop playing the 4 most essential chords in the key, 1, 6 minor, 4, and 5, but not in that order. It's pretty common to see loops based on pretty much any arrangement of these 4 chords, but this particular pattern is unusual. The most significant reason is that while the song is in A, the loop starts on D, the 4 chord. This immediately gives it a restless sort of energy, which is further amplified by the C# in the top line, turning this into a major 7 chord. Major 7s are weird. They're major, sure, but they feel unsettled, driving home the point that despite its metric position, this isn't actually the 1 chord. That comes next, releasing all that major 7 tension into what is, effectively, an A power chord. That's way more stable, at least harmonically. Metrically, though, the 2nd chord of a loop is typically the weakest position, and burying the 1 chord there can really undermine the song's overall sense of tonality. There's maybe some of that happening here, but I think she mostly avoids it thanks to the rhythm. She's playing a push chord pattern where the 2nd chord in each bar is played an 8th note early, shifting more of a metric accent onto it through the power of syncopation. This allows the A chord to still feel emphasized and stable enough to serve as a solid root, even if the abstract structure of the loop says it shouldn't. From there, she moves to F sharp minor, down to E, then starts over again on D. This gentle slide down the scale gives the rest of the progression a soft, almost melting quality, although the peacefulness of that is contrasted by the somewhat jagged shape of the top line. Still, it provides a smooth connection that leads from the F sharp minor all the way back around to the A. In fact, if we rotate it around, you can really hear how the entire structure of the loop guides your ear back to that 1 chord. But the most important line to me is actually the middle one played on the G string. This is just an A the entire time. It's actually an open note. She has a capo on the 2nd fret, so while she's playing an open G string, it's sounding a whole step higher. This lets her move the other 2 lines wherever she wants on the fretboard without ever losing access to this note. And for most of the loop, it's pretty inconspicuous. After all, D major, A major, and F sharp minor all contain the note A, but E major doesn't. In fact, it pretty importantly doesn't, because E major is the 5 chord whose job it is to point back to 1. It does that with the scale's leading tone, the note a half step below the root, in this case G sharp. In the top line, we see her emphasize that function, sliding the A down as the chords change, but in the middle, the A sits still. This blunts the directional power of the chord because the root it's trying to point you toward is already there, and it creates this intense dissonance between the middle and top lines as that half-step disagreement causes the 2 notes to rub really hard against each other. This unmoving line is also really interesting from a metaphorical perspective, conveying the sense that underneath all the desperate motion in the song's story, the place she's in remains, in some meaningful way, the same. And then the vocals come in. Each verse consists of 4 phrases in a sort of melodic call and response pattern. For the first 2 phrases, the call is a step down from F sharp to E, you get a fast car, hanging on the 5th for some instability, and the response dances around A, I want a ticket to anywhere, resolving to the root to wrap up the phrase. It's simple, but it's classic, and the low E lets her really show off the depth and warmth of her lower register. This same pattern starts the first half of every verse, establishing a consistent energy level that the second half builds on. In the first 2 verses, that build looks like this. The 3rd phrase begins with a higher call, starting on C sharp. Any place is better. It's the same basic shape as before, just shifted up into more of a middle register. The response, though, is exactly the same as the previous ones, starting from 0, got nothing to lose, again dancing around A. For the last phrase, she does the high call again, and then finally we get a higher response, jumping all the way up to E as a capstone for the section's energy, me, myself, I got nothing to prove, before walking down the scale to a final resolution on A. Remember that E. It's gonna be really important. But before we get into that, let's talk song form. In pop and rock songwriting, it's pretty normal for each verse to add something new, slowly building out the orchestration to keep the momentum moving in the right direction. And they could have done that here, maybe bringing in a full drum beat in the 2nd verse, adding a violin background line in the 3rd, and so on. But they didn't. From an orchestral standpoint, the first verse, you get a fast car, I want a ticket to anywhere, sounds almost exactly the same as the last one, you get a fast car, I got a job that pays all our bills, with Chapman's voice and guitar accompanied by soft drums from Denny Fongheiser and a subdued bass part by Larry Klein. And to an extent, I think this contributes to the poignancy of the song, again emphasizing that while things are certainly happening in the story, she's not actually going anywhere. But I also don't want to overhype it, because while it's unusual for pop, it's a much more common artistic choice in the genre this actually belongs to. folk. Chapman is very much a singer-songwriter, and that style is often less about intricate arrangements and more about open soundscapes with the vocals front and center, keeping the listener's attention focused squarely on the story itself. That story is the main thing that changes between verses, and I don't think I can really say I analyzed this song without talking about it, so I'm gonna put on my polyphonic hat for a second and do some honest-to-God lyrical analysis. I mean, not of the actual story, you can get that by just listening to the words, but I do want to look at how she tells that story, because it's really well crafted, revealing a little bit at a time until the whole picture becomes clear. The first verse is pretty vague. She wants to go somewhere, but there's not a huge sense of urgency. The emphasis on the car being fast even makes it sound like she's just looking for a joyride. There's a hint of something deeper going on. Starting from zero, got nothing to lose. But for the most part, she sounds like she's bored and looking for something fun to do. There's very little concrete narrative information, just a sort of restless wanderlust. In the second verse, though, that starts to change. She begins to reveal her plan, and the ride starts to sound a bit more permanent. She sings about having saved up some money to move to a nearby city and building a life there away from whatever's troubling her here. There's still some unanswered questions, but the tone has clearly shifted from, hey, let's go for a ride, to, hey, we gotta go. And the third verse finally shows us a bit of what she's running from. We learn that her mother left her father's an unemployed alcoholic, described with one of the most scathing juxtapositions I've ever heard. He says body's too old for working. Body's too young to look like his. And the narrator herself has dropped out of school to look after him. She feels trapped in a dead end, in a life that doesn't care about her or her dreams. She didn't want to drop out, but her father couldn't take care of himself and no one else was gonna help. And we can hear how painful that is for her in the melody. In both of the first two verses, she places that high E near the start of the final line, finally see what it means to be living, representing a bright-eyed hopefulness that her grand ambitions are going to work out. Here, though, she doesn't. I quit school, that's what I did. But the E isn't gone either. It's moved a bar earlier to the opening of the phrase where she sings about her obligation to her father. Somebody's got to take care of him. That hope is no longer an answer. Now it's a question. Her dreams are being subsumed by her reality as she's forced to abandon her own life and take responsibility for someone else's. From there, we get a little half verse where she finds herself at a crossroads. We gotta make a decision. Leave tonight or live and die this way. And then, pushed to her breaking point, she takes the leap and actually leaves, bringing us with her into the chorus. Here, the riff stops, replaced with strummed chords. Although that progression might look familiar. It's the exact same chords as the riff, just spread out to a full bar each. She's laying it out slowly and clearly to make absolutely certain you remember it, because it's about to start dissolving. After playing through the whole thing, she plays this, which is the same chords again, but this time without A major. We've lost the one chord, perhaps signifying that she's losing her sense of home. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Over top, we see not just the return of the high E, but a bend even higher to F sharp. I had a feeling that I belong. Implying that for the first time in her life, she's actually following her dreams. She's doing something for herself, and it feels good. From there, the progression dissolves even further, dropping the F sharp minor from the middle and just playing the outer chords, removing any sense of that original A major tonality. Or at least trying to, but as the key center fades away from the harmony, the melody becomes more and more insistent, ending on this repeated resolution back to the root. Be someone, be someone. Be someone. As she holds on to the hope of building her own home as her adventure progresses. And that's really the theme of this chorus. Hope. She's made her break and she's ready to see what the world really has to offer. And that excitement is mirrored by Fongheiser. In the verse, he's way in the back, quietly keeping time with hi-hats and cross sticks. But for the chorus, he switches to a full groove. At this point, we're over 2 minutes into the song, and we haven't really heard any significant textural changes, so while this is not perhaps the most explosive drum part ever recorded, the context makes it hugely impactful, setting this moment of the story apart from everything that comes before or after it. It's triumphant, or at least that's what it sounds like this time. You see, this song has 3 choruses, and while lyrically and orchestrally they're all pretty much the same, each one follows a different verse, so each time the events of that chorus are heard in a different context. She even makes this changing perspective explicit in the lyrics, starting almost every verse with the same line, "You get a fast car," before clarifying how her relationship to that fast car has evolved. The first time through, we've just heard about how hard her life has been, so this becomes a thrilling moment of escape as she and her partner drive off to build a better one. But in the 4th verse, we see how that's working out, and it's not quite what she'd imagined. The two of them are happy together, but they're struggling to find much work and money's still tight. Things are looking up, but right now she's stuck working to build the foundation for that better life, and her partner's not really helping. And remember that high E? Yeah, it's gone. She doesn't sing it at all. Her hopes and dreams are taking a backseat once again to the responsibilities of her actual life, and the musical signifier of those hopes and dreams has completely disappeared. So when the chorus returns, that moment of escape doesn't feel quite so triumphant anymore. Instead, it becomes defiant, a happy memory she can hold onto in the face of her current hardships. It's an instant of pure bliss and freedom that she aspires to find in a more permanent way. It's the past that motivates her to build her future. But again, the story's not over. In the last verse, everything comes full circle. Her relationship with her partner has soured, and she finds herself back in the same place she was with her father, taking care of someone who refuses to take care of themselves. In the end, she resigns herself to her fate, accepting that this will always be her life. Lyrically, she does this by taking a line from the 2nd verse, "I got a plan to get us out of here," and reframing it to admit defeat. "Got no plans, I ain't going nowhere." But musically, it's devastating. It was bad enough when the 4th verse left out the high E, but now it's back in a brand new spot. Here, it starts the 3rd phrase, where she calls back to her old ambitions, "I'd always hope for better, thought maybe together you and me find it," giving us one last glimpse of the person she was, before the person she said to become drops back down and gives up for good. Take a fast car and keep on driving. It's a painful image, and that knife gets twisted again as they return once more to the chorus. Again, nothing has really changed musically, except for a slightly different drum fill in the middle, but what's absolutely changed is the context. This memory isn't happy anymore. There's a bitterness to it, a resentment at the naivety that led her to think this would all work out in the first place, and a quiet anger at the people and systems that betrayed her, forcing her to settle for where she wound up. And we can hear that anger in the end of the song, where she sings one final half verse. The words are almost the same as the one before the first chorus, with one all-important twist. Instead of saying, "We gotta make a decision," it's just you. You gotta make a decision. Leave tonight or live and die this way. Is she asking her partner to commit to staying, or telling them to leave so she can focus on herself? It's ambiguous, and I think that's the point. She wants both. She wants neither. And ultimately, she's afraid that what she wants doesn't actually matter. I've seen some reviews call this song hopeful or optimistic, and that reading is definitely there too. Great art like this never means just one thing, no matter how clear its meaning might seem, and if that's how you hear it, great, hold on to that. But to me, it's hard not to hear it as a tragedy when so much of the song is wrapped up in a narrative of pain, loss, and a slowly breaking heart. That's pretty much it, but I suspect some of you have been waiting for me to talk about the recent cover by Luke Combs. Honestly though, I don't have all that much to say. It's a pretty straightforward cover. His vocal delivery is a little rougher, which makes him sound a little angrier, and they're doing more of that orchestral layering thing I said the song didn't need, which kinda proves my point, although, to be fair, the addition of a pedal steel guitar does sound nice. But by far the most significant change is that instead of being sung by a queer black woman, it's sung by, as far as I can tell, a straight white man. That changes the subtext in a lot of complicated ways. And Combs seems to have known that going in, given that he made the surprising, but I think correct decision not to change the song's only explicit lyrical reference to the singer's gender. So I work in the market as a checkout girl. Chapman herself has also said she appreciates the cover, which does make it feel more okay, and it's cool that it's introducing her work to a new generation that might not otherwise have found her. But on the other hand, there are concerns that Combs might wind up pulling an Elvis, as it were, becoming the definitive version of the song in many listeners' minds, eclipsing the original and erasing the cultural contributions of the artist that actually made it. And those fears aren't unfounded. While researching this video, I went to look up the song's lyrics, and Google showed me this. And Google? That's unacceptable. You need to fix it. now. Beyond that, it also says a lot that the first #1 single written solely by a black woman in the entire history of the Billboard country charts didn't happen until 2023, and only happened at all because it was filtered through the public image of a white man, especially given the genre's origins in black American folk music around the turn of the 20th century. All of that is true, and there should definitely be a conversation about it, but this is where I acknowledge my limitations. Someone with my background and life experience shouldn't be the one leading that conversation. I don't want to drown out more qualified voices, so I'm not going to try. Instead, I'll put a link in the description to a great article by Emily Yar collecting the complicated reactions of a lot of black country fans, artists, and scholars that handles the topic with much more nuance and care than I could do on my own. I'd really recommend you read it. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible, and extra special thanks to our featured patrons, Blake White, Susan Jones, Jill Sundgaard, Duck, Howard Levine, Warren Huart, Damien Fuller-Sutherland, Jon Hancock, and Jeff. If you want to help out and help us pick the next song we analyze too, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.